conviction has not gotten a lot of rest this summer and is just done an incredible and tremendous amount of work to lead our district through such a challenging time. So I would like to introduce Pasquale to give us some of his wisdom this morning.
Thank you, Sarah. I don't know how esteemed I feel, but I'm happy to be with you all here in this space, despite the fact that I think we are all kind of in various places with having to relate to people consistently in formats like this. But I do feel honored to have a little bit of your time here this morning and to be sitting with this community of educators. I want to first and foremost acknowledge the fact that, as Sarah said at the top, this is a very unusual kickoff to the school year. And the way in which things have shifted consistently and rapidly throughout the summer certainly has caused us a lot of anxiety. And I know some of that has then moved on to creating anxiety for you all, that delays in scheduling and staffing and things that we would have pretty much ironed out at this point in the year have amplified the anxiety and frustration that a lot of you are sitting with. So I want to acknowledge that and also let you know that those things really are byproducts and derivatives of the circumstances that we're sitting in. It's not for a lack of focus and effort to try to resolve these things. We have had teachers, principals giving up their summers to participate in working groups and task force, district staff working nonstop. So I think both of those things are true, and I offer that not as a way of creating excuses, but just as a way of explaining. I think that we are sitting collectively as a community of educators with circumstances that, in my view, are more challenging than what we were sitting with last spring. That's probably not the ideal sentiment, rah-rah sentiment to include in a set of kickoff remarks. But I feel the only way for us to be successful this year is to really develop transparency, connectivity, communication, and trust up and down this organization for us to kind of work through these very, very choppy waters that we're in. Public health is no doubt on your mind as it is on my mind every day. What happens in public health is really the prerequisite to any kind of serious discussion about whether or not we'll be able to return at some point this year to our classrooms. I know that a lot of you already understand the way this has worked since mid-July, that schools residing in counties that are on that state watch list have to come off that watch list and be there off that watch list for 14 consecutive days before the conversation can even start about reopening schools. San Diego County, Santa Cruz County came off the watch list this week. I've talked to people in both of those districts, and the fact that they are off the watch list does not mean in a week and a half or 2 weeks they're going to be back in classrooms. So I just want to kind of temper anxieties that people might be feeling. I am not, nor should I be, in the business of making predictions, but I do believe we are going to be in distance learning for the foreseeable future. I know that's a little vague. That may mean a couple months. That may mean the end of the calendar year. If things change, and they would need to change pretty rapidly, we're certainly going to have a conversation with you all very openly and transparently. But given what I've watched in recent months in terms of the trajectory of the information we have and the guidance from public health, I think we're going to be where we are for a little while. I will really try to be more specific about that in the coming weeks. We have a public health briefing this afternoon at 2 o'clock. If anything informative comes up there, I will certainly pass it along. For those of you who just want to kind of know broadly what the metrics are, one of the key things that people will be looking at as a precursor to us being able to reopen is the case rate. The goal would be to have a case rate in the county that is less than 100 cases per 100,000 residents. And as of Tuesday, Alameda County was still close to 270 cases per 100,000 residents in that 14-day case rate. So we have a ways to go before the data trends the way we need it to trend, and before public health then takes those trends and translates that into guidance. One of the things that I'm sure is on the mind of some elementary folks is this concept of waivers that have been discussed since mid-July. That is another thing too that I really want to kind of temper people's anxiety with. I had multiple conversations with Dr. Nick Moss, our county public health officer, last week. They were convening a group to just talk about this waiver process in Alameda County. Right now, a waiver process doesn't exist in our county, and the state has also issued guidance that said, if and when that opportunity comes up in a county, we should not consider approving waivers where counties are still above 200 cases per 100,000 people. So that is the public health picture in terms of how it's informing our current decision. And again, I'll have a lot more information in the coming weeks, and as it comes in, we'll share it with you. I also want to note that while I'm saying that I see us in this position for the foreseeable future, I don't want to, nor should I let myself forget the fact that our closure, while I think it is the right thing to do relative to staff and student safety at this point, is having a whole additional set of consequences on our young people. I think we all know that as educators, that the limitations and constraints of the current format really are increasing the possibility and probability for educational injury, for educational inequity, for some of our most vulnerable students. So I want to keep that in mind as a driver for myself on how we support you in doing distance learning as well as we can to try to mitigate that, given the fact that right now the safest play is for us all to be where we are. So what now? Where do we go from here? We are starting school in this space. And I want to note that many of you are probably feeling deflated, are probably feeling frustrated, and frankly, maybe just a little bit sad that the work that we do is part of who we are, and the relationships and dynamics of being in the classroom or being one-on-one with kids are things that we don't have right now. And so I think it's okay for us to feel the way that we might be feeling. But I think what's most important has remained the same. It's the context that's changed. I've often held up this model, my team has as well, from Richard Elmore, this concept of the instructional core. And for those of you who are familiar with it or not, picture a triangle, and at the top of that triangle is teacher, at the second point in that triangle is student, and at the third point in that triangle is content or curriculum. And those three interdependent relationships are really the core of what we do. They are, to me, the nucleus of the atom in terms of education. Your relationship with students, their relationships with you, your relationship to your curriculum, and how students experience that curriculum. So again, I think our core mission is the same. It's just been placed in a context now that has layered an exponential amount of new challenges on us. And how do we get there? How do we make that work? Well, I don't think that's something for me to announce. I think that is something for us to come to together as a community of educators. And I think all of the collective bandwidth and experience and creativity and agency on this call and in this virtual space today is going to be necessary for us to even be reasonably successful this year with kids. I have no choice and no desire to be anything except confident in our ability to make that happen for our students. I've watched this firsthand this week. My wife is an educator, and I've seen her start the engine with her students with the limitations of this virtual space, and with our two young children initiating a constant assault on the continuity of our work as we try to take care of them at home. So I know that is something that many of you are dealing with as well. How do we do this difficult work in even more difficult contexts with the distractions of our own families and our own needs piled on top of that? It is, like I say, a monumental challenge. But again, I have no option or desire to be anything other than confident in our ability to figure this out to the greatest degree possible. We won't have our usual set of tools. That's what's going to make it difficult. We won't have the proximity at our disposal to catch those behavioral cues in our classroom, to redirect and deal with attention problems, to administer that well-deserved and sometimes critical shot of affirmation or confidence that our students need when they are struggling. Those are things that we'll have to figure out in this space together. But again, the art and science of teaching right now, I think, has probably never been harder, but I also think it's never been more important. You all are going to be facilitators of connectivity in a context that really is dominated by distance at the moment. I think you all are going to be the portals of new concepts and ideas and imagination amidst a culture that is steeped in generalized isolation right now. I think you all have the power, as you always do. Sorry that my alarm went off. You all have the power, as you always do, to couple content with care to facilitate student growth. And you all will hold the spaces where we, as Paulo Freire says, help students manage their own transformations. It's not easy, and I'm not positing for even a second that it is. There's a woman named Betty Lucet. She was a writer and an organic chemist, and she wrote, I don't want to botch it, so I'm going to read it, that creativity's greatest moments to act are in times of mounting confusion and chaos. She noted that another way to describe change is that chaos is often necessary first, so that creativity then has disassembled components available to reconstruct or put together in new forms. And I wonder, are there opportunities for us now to look at the separate components and disassembled components of what we called school and think about how to reassemble them in ways that are more equitable and more inclusive and more engaging? I personally think that possibility is in front of us. Can we change the way we do business to upend the narrow definitions and limitations of what it means to be smart or what it means to be a scholar? Those concepts that for years I think have marginalized the creativity and beauty and intellect of students' home culture and students' experience. Too often, I think, hitting in these times in particular, our students, our Black students, or children of African descent. I think it's time to think that way, despite the limitations of our current format. And I think our current format and the disruption to our patterns and habits may be the opportunity in the opening to think about how we do things differently, not just in this space, but in the broader context of our work. Do we have goals and priorities for 2021? We absolutely do, and Sarah will talk about those in detail in a moment, and we'll work through them together. And we want to present those goals not as platitudes or statements of philosophy, but really as actionable and observable ways that students are experiencing school here and in whatever's next, the way you as teachers are experiencing your practice and profession, principals, district staff, really talking about what the visible practices are and need to be universally for us to be successful for students. Many of those concepts will come from the graduate profile that we spent a lot of time on last year. We're not abandoning that process or those processes or that work that we did. That will remain our North Star in terms of the skills and dispositions we want to pursue for kids, irrespective of the context we're in. And again, while I value plans and profiles and standards, that's the administrator in me. I know that that stuff does not work without you all being as good as you can be. The way that you forge connection and relationships with kids, particularly in this space, is going to be a determinant of how successful we are. The way you deliver instruction with all kids is, again, going to be the deciding factor in how successful we are. I know it feels like we are all being asked to do more at a time where it feels like we have less to give. But I think if we dig deep and come up with as much as we can, it will be worth it, not only for our students, but for the fact that I think myself, like a lot of educators, derive the greatest satisfaction when I know I've played a small part in kind of the evolution or growth of the young people in front of me. Paulo Freire, again, in the book, The Pedagogy of the Oppressed, basically said that education can go a couple of different ways. It can be used to dominate or to adapt people to oppressive conditions, or it can be used to liberate and essentially be freedom in practice. And I think when you think about that, I don't want to shy away for fear of being melodramatic. That is what we're doing here in this time, in this context. We as educators, you as teachers, are exhibiting freedom in practice for our students. And that's applicable to a lot of conditions that we are currently working through. We can, I think, even with these limitations as educators, strive to empower our kids so that they can question and challenge and ultimately transform oppressive conditions rather than adapt to them. I think we can guide students away from limiting beliefs based on someone else's notion of what scholarship and intellectualism looks like, whether that's based on class or culture or race or gender identity. It seems pretty obvious to me generally that the world needs reinforcements now in the form of smart, thoughtful, empathetic, and creative community members. And the path to that type of self-actualization generally, in my experience, runs through schools and classrooms that are populated by really talented, committed teachers and educators. So our classrooms and our schools are going to look different this fall for sure. But again, I genuinely believe that our agency and our creativity, both individually and collectively, can be banded together in a way where we do the very best we can for kids and families and for each other as community members and as educators. This practice of what we do really is who we are in many ways. So I will close with my statement that I have no choice and no desire to be anything other than confident. I know this is a challenging time and a challenging situation, but I am deeply moved to see all you here this morning, and I can't wait to move forward. Maybe I should rewrite that part. It's not that I can't wait, but here we go, moving forward together. So I really appreciate your time and thank you for listening. And I hope you get what you need out of the next few days and that we all step back and consider looking at some of the things we do in some of our practices in a really radically open-minded way and perhaps think about doing things differently. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Pasquale. So before we head out and you will go to your next session, I just wanted to show you a few graphics of some things that Pasquale mentioned. So from your feedback, from the multitude of family feedback, and from our students' voices, we really came together with some very clear practices and priorities for this year. So the goals that we have, the practices and priorities, are really about students being able to model their thinking on a daily basis, to be able to do some experiential learning. We heard from our students that sometimes it's hard for them to be motivated. So that's a really important